So, good afternoon. This is our 11 April update for our OASIS Plus webinar series. If you are just joining, these follow a very formulaic pattern so that we are covering the same type of information in the same order from week to week. So if you need to go back and rewatch these, you can skip ahead, or if you miss one and you're watching it in a time latent scenario, you should be able to skip to the pertinent parts. So our agenda for today, just covering some administrative updates. So that's kind of internal with our team and clients and the support that we're providing, and anything new and exciting happening on the Triton side. We'll talk specifically about OASIS Plus and what's going on with the opportunity. We've got some slides around a weekly topic. And so far, these have been mostly inspired by conversations we've had with clients or points of clarification or things that we find ourselves answering over and over again, which we're happy to do. But sometimes we just know it's worth it to take a couple minutes and dive in deep on a topic. And then at the end, one of the great things about having this smaller audience is that we can open it up for any Q&A that you all have. So if there's specific things that we haven't had a chance to address yet or that have popped up since the last time we talked, we can take a few minutes and dive into those issues. So for today, I do want to introduce Kylie. I know you guys were going to get paired up with her. She's one of our fantastic analysts. So I'm actually going to turn over the weekly topic to her so that maybe I won't have to do every webinar in perpetuity. So she's fantastic. She also does a lot of our podcasts. If you haven't checked those out on our website, she's got a very soothing voice and she's got a lot of great proposal tips. So you might recognize the soothing tones here of Kylie Stewart. But happy to have her joining us today. And then we are updating the material. I know I covered this morning with you all, but we're updating the material as we go here on that information hub so that, I've got a new calendar to post. We're going to review that here in a minute. We've got a phased checklist. So as we get more refined dates, as we get more access to Symphony, there's going to be more information that we can share about what people need to be doing at what phase so that things stay on track. And this doesn't feel like a mad rush during the last 2 weeks of the proposal to get everything organized and uploaded. The idea here is that we're going to take a slow and steady pace. Everybody can enjoy some summer vacation, take advantage of the holidays, not have to work through Memorial Day and the 4th of July and Juneteenth and Father's Day and Mother's Day and everything that's happening probably between now and proposal submission. At least not, you won't be chained to your desk because of OASIS Plus, hopefully. So other proposals might keep you there, but we're going to try to give you a very civilized approach here so that you can eat this elephant one bite at a time. And we haven't seen any issues or commonly asked questions this week with regards to the information hub and access there. But we'll keep you up to date if anything changes. And then if at any time you need to add people to that information hub because you want them to be able to download the guides or watch the videos, just let us know. It's a real quick registration on our side and they'll get a link. And then, you can obviously go to the Trident website and there's the login in the top right. And everybody's got a unique login to be able to get access to that info hub. Okay, so real quick, some opportunity updates. This is the big change. Last week, if you go back in time and watch last week's webinar, I'm really excited because, we're allegedly hours away from a final RFP that obviously did not come. So now we're thinking that final RFP, based on what GSA has said, is going to be out on or before 29 April. I think 30 April is over a weekend. So, they said within 30 days. That puts it right at the end of the month. We did find an article where Tiffany Hickson, who's one of the assistant commissioners over at GSA, she did an interview, and basically what it sounds like is they got an earful. They knew they were going to, but they got an earful on the second draft RFP. So they're trying to, dot their I's, cross their T's, make sure everything is good to go and makes it through legal review so that they can get the final solicitation released. And I do want to just draw your attention to this last paragraph here that's in bold, where she has hinted at modifications around the evaluation of contractors, changes to the NICS code structures, and the supply chain risk management requirements. Right now, everything on the supply chain risk management, it's actually supply chain and cybersecurity risk. There's a pre-contract assessment that people have to do. They have toyed with including an actual written plan On previous GWACs, we've seen that always get pushed to a post-award requirement, so they're not interested in evaluating people's plans ahead of time necessarily, but we're just keeping an eye on that to see if it's just going to be okay, post-award, you now have to do these additional things, or if it's just something simple like a change in reporting requirements, or if it's actually going to be more of a compliance-driven change. So we don't know. This is the only hint that I've seen about what might be changing, so we are on standby for that. But we do still anticipate a 90-day response to the proposal. So that kind of takes us into this recommended calendar. And obviously, you guys have a ton of discretion in how you set this up. But we know there's going to be certain major milestones, and we've spaced them out so that you kind of have one big focus every week. And we do recommend front loading a lot of the work just in terms of getting the forms signed and getting your documentation back so that you can organize it, sit on it, stew on it, think about it, commit to it, get it uploaded, and get it scored. So if we see a release, around the 27th, right? We just picked it the last Thursday in April because GSA likes to do things historically on Thursdays. That way they can go enjoy their weekend, and everybody else gets to spin up, right? It's the usual proposal drama. So yeah, if something came out on the 27th of April, then a 90-day window would put us with a submission right at the end of July. So right around the 28th. We just picked, again, these are notional dates based on what we expect to see. But what we would recommend doing is kind of taking that first week to read through the solicitation, all 17 attachments that are going to come with it, look for the changes, digest the changes, dial into some more Trident webinars, make sure that you are processing the information and adjusting your project lineup if you need to, getting the forms prepped, but not sending them out necessarily right away. So in theory, you could be drafting the forms now, but I do think it's possible that we could see a change in what the requirements are on that form or how you indicate certain areas beyond the basic project information, because as you've probably seen, that JP3 form covers all of the other scorecard areas. So with integrated experience and management, and right now they've just kind of dumped all of the requirements for the unrestricted track and the small business tracks and all the domains into the block. And so there's just a lot more data there than it needs to be. So I don't know if we're going to see more tailored forms or if it's going to turn into a less fillable form where you've got to select from a drop down, or not sure what they're going to do there, but I think that that's an area that's likely to see a little bit of change. And then we also just recommend holding on sending those out. It doesn't necessarily apply to everybody that's pursuing this, but if you are teaming, highly encourage you and your teammates, before anything gets sent to a client, to just look at the forms in the aggregate and make sure that everybody is aligning things to the appropriate domain, or that if someone is trying to take credit in multiple domains, that the math checks out, the documentation checks out, and there's no kind of cross-cutting that shouldn't be happening. Because I can't tell you, it was a slightly different scenario on Polaris because you could only align one project to one NICS code. But as people were participating on different teams, we did see things where we wanted to use a project for one NICS code, but the project owner insisted on using it in a different one because they were also using it on another bid with another team. And so they had to get multiple project verification forms signed. And so I just bring that up as a way of saying the potential exists for there to be some confusion or room for interpretation. And it's just better if you kind of get that squared away at the outset so that you know what the form is going to say when it gets signed. And I know that sounds super simple, but it bears repeating just to save you the headaches down the road. And I also think it makes sense to just take a beat before you send things out in case GSA attaches the wrong file to the solicitation that they release, or in case they make a modification to it, or in case somebody in the first week, I don't know, throws out a pre-award challenge and the whole thing gets paused. So we're gonna read everything really carefully. We're gonna read it again really carefully. We're gonna prep our forms, pause on them, and then once everybody's aligned in strategy, get those sent out, and then give your customers a couple weeks to fill those out, send them back. And then we'll have another huddle, right? Once we have everything that's signed, make sure it came back signed, make sure the clients didn't take any exception to what we were trying to claim, and that everything still says what we think it should. And then get all your forms from your subcontractors if you have any teammates, right? They're going to have to do reps and certs. If they're providing project documentation, we want to make sure we get all that. And then kind of doing a final record check towards the end of June. And this would just be to make sure that there hasn't been another FPDS record released, or that there hasn't been, a CPARS that got sent in March and is now finally showing up in PPIS, now that it's, late in June, and that we're just operating off of the most recent information. Because that's the kind of downside of these longer draws, is that there's more time to get everything assembled, but there's more time for things to change or for projects to go in a different track. So we're going to keep a real close eye on what our eligibility dates are, on what the amendments say, on project end dates, because all those little things can change the calculations for reporting periods and for annual values and things like that. So we are aware of all those things. And again, I will just mention that that's why this is such a notional calendar. We've got some room to space things out. But as we move into July, really all of the sending out and getting back of paperwork, all the data calls should be done. And July should just be focused on making sure that when the amendments come out or when Q&A come out, that it doesn't change anything. And then getting kind of positioned for this pre-upload review, which you will go through with Trident, right? We're going to take a look at all your tag documentation, all of your statements of work, all of your JP3s, your 527, and your financial statements go along with that, all your tangential volumes, just making sure that everything says what it needs to, giving ourselves a little bit of buffer before we actually need to submit. And I would not submit too close to submission, right? We still want to give ourselves at least a 24-hour buffer. But if we're not waiting on any last-minute documentation to come in, submitting the week of the 24th is kind of what we're aiming for in July. Symphony does have the ability, if you're familiar with the portal, that even if you submit something, you can pull it back. We obviously don't want to be doing that more times than we need to. But we'll hold until, the week that the proposal is due. That way, if there's, a late in the game SF30 that comes out, or a change or anything that needs to be acknowledged, we'll have all that paperwork up to date too. So again, front loading a lot of the data calls so that we can get the documents back. And if a project comes back and doesn't say what we think it needs to, then we can find an alternate project, and we've got still, 45 days to make that work, rather than trying to do all that in the final throes. And we also don't want to give our clients too much time to do a data call, right? You got to give them a deadline so that they actually respond in a timely manner and get it closed out. Otherwise, things just linger and they go on summer vacation. You go on summer vacation before you know it, 3 weeks have passed. So any questions about the calendar? Our notional calendar. Okay. We do have that phase checklist that is on the information hub, but really, since we're in the pre-RFP phase, these are kind of the primary actions that we recommend taking right now, right? So getting into that second draft RFP, getting familiar with the changes. Obviously, when we get that final, that's going to be your first action too. Make sure you've graded all of your projects individually so that you know what the period of performance is, you know what the annual value is, you know where you're going to look to substantiate your FTE numbers. And Kylie's going to talk more about that in a little bit. Getting your project documentation for each qualifying project, right? And we recommend right now, we don't want you to go overboard, but if for each project, especially if it's federal prime work, if you can get the FPDS record, the contract award document, CPARs if you've got them, and then the statement of work and PWS, if you can get those 4 things for 90% of your projects, you should be in pretty good shape. Making sure you take a look at your SAM.gov record, right? Because everything that's in Symphony is going to feed from SAM.gov. So if there's any changes that need to happen there, or if there's any access changes that you need to make with your administrators, go ahead and make those now. And then getting everybody registered for the Symphony portal. It's not fully open yet. You can register it and you can see the, coming soon under all the OASIS Plus bids, but it's not open beyond that right now. If you are teaming, making sure your teammates register. And by the way, this is one of those things I do want to mention where teammates are not submitting their own bid. It all needs to go, all the documentation needs to go under the prime offers bid. So if you do have a teammate that's going to be working with you, they need to register under your entity. So they're going to need your unique identifier, your cage code, your company name, and you'll have to grant them access to see your Symphony profile, basically. But obviously, anybody who has access to Symphony is going to have the ability to edit things in Symphony. So you just may want to, approve people with discretion. Other things you can be doing right now, if you don't have a professional employee compensation plan kind of sitting on the shelf, this is something that you can work on. This is one of those few narrative sections of the proposal. It's not getting an adjectival rating. It's going to get a pass fail. Did it include the requirements that it needed to? Did you include it? Did you submit it? Does it say what it needs to say? Kind of evaluation, but it is an important thing. And there's some really specific requirements in the draft RFP about what this needs to include. Same thing with the draft uncompensated overtime policy. For the unrestricted track, that subcontracting plan. And this is an area, just again, big old caveat here, that we've seen a lot of modifications to in the course of this progression with the RFP. So, excuse me. Changes in subcontracting goals, some changes in what needs to be included and how it gets reflected. And what's in the RFP is not all inclusive for the plan. You actually do need to get into the FARs or the FAR and see what the requirements are for that subcontracting plan, because there's about 27 components that it's supposed to include, and they're not taking just the corporate master subcontracting plans. This needs to be an OASIS Plus specific plan. And then taking a look at that pre-award evaluation basic safeguarding questionnaire. That is a mouthful, but that's one of the attachments that came out with the draft, both the first draft and the second draft RFP. So it's pretty straightforward. It's an Excel document. And other things you can be doing would be just confirming that point of contact information for all the projects that you plan to use. It's a great idea to notify the customers that, hey, we're planning on using this project for OASIS Plus. We might have a form that we need you to sign. We'll be sure to be in touch, and it should be pretty straightforward where you're going to pre-fill it out for them. But you all have to be articulate enough and have enough understanding of the RFP to be able to explain to your clients why you might be trying to get something signed off in an area that it was not assigned or coded in, or if you're trying to get credit for something that's not substantiated in black and white. You just got to make sure that your client is aware of what you're asking for and that it's something you're actually delivering, because obviously we don't want to misrepresent anything as part of this bid. Okay, so at this point, I'm actually going to go on mute, get a sip of water, turn it over to Kylie, and she's going to talk through. We got three quick deep dives this week, mostly related to contract documentation and how the numbers work around people and clearances. So Kylie, over to you, ma'am.
Cool, thank you so much. Our first one is going to dive into that section L.5.2.3.2, which is the qualifying project experience in terms of scale. And so there's an opportunity for you to receive points for your projects when they have a certain scale. And that's in both the unrestricted and the small business pools. And the scales are different for each of those. But what we're going to have to do is kind of prove or verify that the scale of your project is what it is. And so we will take either FPDS, your statement of work, original contract forms, or kind of as a backup, that JP3 form to determine what the total the total value of the contract is. And so your credit is going to be provided for that total annual project value and or your FTEs. And so you can do this in two ways. As an example, in the unrestricted pool, you have like $1.5 million gives you a point in scale, or, and I don't remember off the top of my head, I think it's like 5 FTE. And so you can prove one or the other. So you can take your total annual project value or your FTE. If you do have FTE as kind of the scale that you want to use, if your project value is not at that 1.5 million in the unrestricted pool, you can prove it by showing that you have employees that meet that 1,920 annual hours. And so again, when we're talking about FTE, it's full-time equivalent, which means that the total number of regular straight-time hours worked by employees divided by the number of compensable. Oh gosh, did I not? I definitely didn't say that. This is recorded, so that's great. Compensable hours applicable to each annual year. So what all of that means, boiled down into it, is that you have to show that each of your employees on that contract actually worked 1920 annual hours. This comes into play when you have things like instructors who only work a half day, a security guard who only works 4-hour shifts, or smaller chunks of specialists who are not maybe full-time employees on that contract. And that can really influence how um, the positions look on your contract. And so what we're going to look for is specifically FTE and defining it by that 1920 annual hours. If you have scale, so that total annual project value, then you're good to go and you don't have to worry about proving FTE. But if you have a smaller contract that you have a lot of employees on, you can prove it through the FTE. So we're going to go to the next one and talk a little bit about maybe what the difference is between an LCAT, not LCAC, an LCAT and an FTE, because this can kind of get kind of funky. So when we're talking about an LCAT, that's a labor category, so a different type of job. We do get credit, and these are two separate scorecard sections. So you get credit for scale, which is going to be that total project value, and FTE, but then you're also going to get a separate point for integrated experience. And that's where we are getting points because we have multiple labor categories. And so the RFP defines labor categories and differentiating between those labor categories as long as they have a varying level of seniority and occupational classification. That's the easy one. If you have an aerospace engineer, it's not the same thing as a logistician, you know. But if you have a senior aerospace engineer, that is different than a junior aerospace engineer. And you'll see here in that blue or green box, you'll see the kind of levels and the years of relevant experience for those positions and for those seniority categories. One thing we want to note is that just because a position is in a different location or has a different security clearance, they're not different labor categories. And so what you'll need to show is that you have 5 or more different labor categories to get a point in this integrated experience field. And those labor categories have to be significantly different. So we have, well, not really significant because we've got senior, junior, and junior journeyman aerospace engineers in our example here. That's 3 different labor categories. And then we have a junior and a SME logistics guy, and that's 2 separate. And so those 3 and that 2 give you 5, and that gets you an extra point.
And one thing I want to add on this, Kylie, is the reason that that attachment J1 is so helpful because it actually provides numbers for the categories because everybody crafts their labor categories a little bit differently. So if you don't have something that says senior, junior, journeyman, if you've got PM 1, 2, and 3, but you've got a description somewhere, either in your key personnel requirements or in the labor category requirements that articulates what the level of experience is that each one of those staff have. So if it's a staffing plan, if it's, whatever that contract documentation looks like, you might still be able to draw this equivalency and show that there's a big enough divide between your senior category and your junior category to qualify as 2 individual or 2 distinct labor categories, if that makes sense. And one of the things I didn't put on this slide or the previous one was that it's, you talked about it with the either or in terms of value or numbers of personnel. The integrated experience is an either or category as well. So we wanted to dive into the labor categories specifically because there's been a lot of questions about this, but this is in that same criteria as you can have integrated experience across multiple domains or a certain number of labor categories. So in certain cases, if you don't have anything that breaks out the specific labor that you had to provide or that maybe there just weren't, 5 or more labor categories, you might still be eligible for a credit here if you can show that you were performing basically a variety of tasks. So if there is something happening in the M&A domain or the T&E domain or, IT services, because on this integrated experience, you can take credit for the domains that are the future domains for OASIS Plus. It's anything that's in that JP5 document. So that is the whole, basically it's all of section C. It's not just the primary 8 domains that are being competed for this track. So we're probably going to dive into that on the next webinar a little bit and show you where you should be looking for that. But just in this category, and I know I'm off script at this point, but while we're here, we might as well talk about it. In this category, it's not 3 additional areas or subdomains or domains. It's you would get credit if you were submitting a relevant qualifying project in the M&A domain. You get credit right there for one. So you just have to show 2 other domain alignments in order to get the credit for having that integrated experience. And there's no minimum threshold in those other domains either. So it's not like it has to be 500K worth of management and advisory plus 500K of T&E plus 500K of IT services. It's just, can you show that you did things in those task areas as long as your relevant qualifying project meets its threshold.
Yeah, and I'll put an asterisk that facilities is different. So
that's true. Yeah, facilities is in its own program over there. So that one, take a close look at that one if that's one of your special domains. So,
but I will say that we want to kind of draw a line in our head here, because when you're talking about a labor category and you're talking about FTE, for FTE, we have to have a minimum of that 19-20 hours to prove 1 FTE. For a labor category, you have to have a minimum of like 1 minute on your contract. And so you can get credit for a journeyman aerospace engineer who worked on your contract for 1 hour, as long as you can prove that they worked on your contract. And so there's no minimum here. There's no minimum on the other side of the integrated experience, those like cross-domain specializations or anything like that. There's no minimums there. There are minimums for scale. And so these two, it helps to kind of separate them in your head so that when you're talking about FTE, it's a different conversation than when you're talking about labor categories. And I'll kick us over to clearances. Again, we're going to split us in our head because we have individual clearances and then we've got company, corporate, facility clearances. So there's 2 different categories here to get credit. The first is that L.5.2.3.4, which is individual clearances. Did you have a contract that required cleared personnel? This is not giving you credit if you had people who have clearances working on your contract. This is giving you credit if your contract required cleared personnel. So there's a little bit of minutia in that, but that does matter. The way that you can prove this is through contract documentation. Some statements of works or PWSs will literally say this person requires a top secret clearance. This person requires a secret clearance. Highlight that, good to go. Another way to do it is with a letter signed by your FSO confirming that that project is there. They don't need to necessarily do by name or anything like that. They just have to say that you had cleared personnel on that contract. And then finally, that signed JP3 form is also an option. Separate from that, and an additional credit receiving option is that you have government facility clearance. And so this is your corporate, your company facility clearance. And so how are we going to prove that? We're going to indicate through your cage code or a security office that you have that verified facility clearance, either at secret, top secret, or something else, and that they've been granted. And GSA will then verify with DISCA for that. So again, we got to keep in our minds that there are 2 separate things. Did you have people who required clearances, and did you have a facility that it was cleared?
And something that's been coming up with contractors a lot this week is, well, can I just show you my DD 254? And the short answer is no. That's actually not one of the permissible pieces of evidence the GSA has asked for in this category. So could you get a letter signed by your FSO and have attachment 1 be the DD 254 that provides some level of validation and credibility? Like, sure, you could. It's not required. So right now, it's really that contract documentation, statement of work that says, here's what you need. Because the problem with the DD 254 is it's going to say that people needed a clearance on the contract, or it's going to state the level of clearance that the bidder or the performer needed to have, but it doesn't tie to individuals. So it's not going to say you need 16 people and here are the clearances that they must be at. It just doesn't have that level of granularity. So that's one of the reasons it's not an acceptable form. And we also recognize, and so does GSA, that there are some sensitivities between saying, hey, we have these by name individuals and this is their clearance level and this is the person they're supporting or the program they're supporting. And here's all the documentation that goes along with it. We don't want to connect too many dots on the unclassified side, right? Because that aggregation is what can make things sensitive sometimes. So GSA has just given us a very straightforward, like, look, if you have a corporate facility clearance and you've got an FSO and they're going to vouch for you that you've got these things, that's good enough for us. So I guess they're determining that FSOs are trustworthy people, which is probably a good ruling to make, all things considered.